Hi, my name is Rondell Corlett, and in this video I wanted to talk about 3 things that I've learned so far in my life. Being 27, that list isn't that long, but learned a few things. And the first thing is driving a standard car. So that's a manual transmission car versus an automatic car. Learning how to read an analog clock, and building a personal computer. And So, I mean, just being an 80s baby, kind of computers became big when I became big at the same time. So all these things are pretty important, and at least one of them I think is pretty strange. So driving a manual transmission, I learned how to drive a manual transmission car on YouTube. I was buying a new car, and I saw that they had a manual transmission car for sale, but I didn't know how to drive it, so I went on YouTube and looked up some videos. I purchased the car, and I didn't get it right. I didn't get it right the first time. Actually, not the second time, or the third time, or the 50th time. I had to keep going back and watching YouTube videos to kind of shore up my technique. But I kept stalling out. And after a while, after a lot of trial and error, I started getting it. So that felt really good, and is pretty important all at the same time, to me anyway. Um, and I think the reason why driving a manual transmission car is so important is that it requires you to follow a list of steps. It's put in the key, press the clutch, make sure the car is in neutral or first or whatever gear you're looking to select. There's a process that you have to follow, and if you don't do it correctly, it's just not going to work. And I think all 3 of these things, driving a standard car, learning how to read an analog clock, and building a personal computer, are all kind of connect in that way, because they require you to use a multi-step process. And the reason why the next one is learning how to read an analog clock. And the reason why that's important is because I learned how to read an analog clock when I was like 16. So, and I think that's important because, I mean, 16, I think, is pretty late. I knew how analog clocks work. I knew what 12 o'clock was. I knew when it was 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. But if someone says, what is 2:53 in the afternoon, I couldn't necessarily tell you until it just kind of came up in conversation when I was with a tutor, and they just showed it to me, and I got it right away. It wasn't very hard, uh, even though it required you to follow multi-steps. First, you look at the big hand and the small hand, and in relation to the numbers, and following the dashes and such. Even though it was a multi-step process, I got it right away. Maybe because I had a little bit of background knowledge on the subject, and it's something that you dealt with all the time. I felt like I was just missing some key steps, and that's another example of a multi-step process where if you're just missing a few key steps in the middle, it doesn't exactly pan out or work. And that's kind of how it connects to driving a manual transmission car, being a multi-step process, and that you have to, even if you don't follow the process to the specific order, you still have to at least accomplish all the steps. And the last section is building a personal computer, and I did that when I was 15, and I was showed how to do that by my uncle. And it's not something that I kind of came up with on my own. Saw him do it a bunch of times, either for school or for personal use, and it's something that I thought was pretty interesting. And actually I tried a few times on my own, kind of experimenting with putting the motherboards in cases and such, but I kept short-circuiting. So I kept creating a short circuit when I would try to power it up, when I would connect the motherboard to the power supply. And I was just missing a few key steps. I was grounding out my motherboard. I had to use copper spacers, and I learned that when I watched my uncle do it step by step. So again, it goes back to the checklist. You go back, you select your motherboard, you select your case, make sure that they're configured correctly, that your stud spaces are in the same place. Again, boom, 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 step by step. And And that was something that came relatively easy when I got that instruction. So unlike driving a manual transmission car that took a lot of trial and error, that this building personal computers is more like reading an analog clock, just because once you're shown how to do it once, right, the first time, you kind of have it. Maybe because it was connected to a point of interest, but all these things together, they all tie together for the simple fact that they represent a process at work. Driving a manual transmission car, again, reading an analog clock, and building a personal computer. Even though on the front end they are seemingly different, they don't have a whole bunch in common on the front end, but when you break it down, how they all work, I feel that they all fit together, and they're all pretty important milestones in my own personal life. Thank you very much.